Man who terrorized Washington for years. The Green River Killer pleaded guilty to the murders of dozens of women in King County, leaving several families grieving throughout the state. Though he's been locked up for decades, tonight, Gary Ridgway is back in King County.
The Pacific Northwest, a land of towering evergreens, mist-shrouded rivers, and snow-capped peaks. But beneath its serene beauty lies a darkness that still haunts the American psyche. Between 1982 and 1998, 49 women vanished along a stretch of highway near Seattle, their bodies discarded in the forests and waterways of King County. For 2 decades, the man responsible eluded justice, hiding in plain sight as a husband, father, and blue-collar worker.
I'm saying stop moving and I'll let you go, but I wasn't going to let her go. Just loved killing women. When I started killing, I just kept on killing them.
So this is a story that has haunted not just Western Washington, but the entire country for decades. The Green River Killer, one of the most prolific serial killers in history, and now he is the focus of a new documentary on Tubi called Sins of the Father, The Green River Killer.
His name was Gary Leon Ridgway, but the world would come to know him by a more sinister title, The Green River Killer. This is the story of how a seemingly ordinary man became a monster, how the system failed to stop him, and how the echoes of his crimes still ripple through time. To understand Ridgway, we must journey back to his beginnings, to the quiet streets of Salt Lake City, Utah, where a troubled boy began nurturing a hatred that would one day explode into unfathomable violence. The making of a monster. Gary Leon Ridgway was born on February 18, 1949, to Thomas and Mary Ridgway. On the surface, his childhood mirrored the post-war American ideal, a working-class family in a quiet neighborhood. But behind closed doors, the Ridgway household simmered with dysfunction. Thomas, a bus driver, was described as cold and domineering, while Mary, a devout Christian, wielded her faith like a weapon. Neighbors recalled her scrubbing Gary's skin raw to cleanse him of sin after minor transgressions. Psychologists later theorized that this toxic blend of parental cruelty and religious fervor warped Ridgway's psyche, planting seeds of misogyny and rage. By age 10, Gary's disturbing behavior surfaced. He tortured animals, a common red flag in future violent offenders, drowning neighborhood cats and dissecting birds. Bedwetting, another marker of childhood trauma, plagued him into his teens. At school, he was a loner, struggling academically and socially. Teachers dismissed him as slow, unaware that his mind festered with violent fantasies. In one chilling incident, he lured a 6-year-old girl into the woods, knifing her in the back. Miraculously, she survived. When questioned, Gary claimed it was an accident. Authorities believed him. After barely graduating high school, Ridgway joined the Navy in 1969. Stationed in the Philippines and Vietnam, he frequented brothels, later confessing that he hated the women but couldn't stop. By 1971, he returned to Washington State, settling in the Seattle suburb of SeaTac. He married his first wife, Claudia, in 1972, but the union crumbled under his infidelity and erratic behavior. Colleagues at the Kenworth truck factory, where he worked as a paint sprayer, found him odd but harmless. He'd stare at women walking by, one coworker recalled, but we figured he was just shy. Ridgway's second marriage, to Marcia in 1985, was equally tumultuous. He insisted on bizarre rituals, like forcing her to shower before sex, and frequently visited sex workers, a habit he hid behind his church-going facade. By the 1980s, his double life was firmly entrenched. Dutiful father to his son, Matthew, by day, predator by night. The stage was set for one of the darkest chapters in American crime. A 20-year failure. The first body surfaced on July 15, 1982. 16-year-old Wendy Lee Caulfield was found strangled in the Green River, her hands bound with cloth. Weeks later, 3 more victims, Deborah Estes, 15, Opal Mills, 16, and Cynthia Hines, 17, were discovered nearby. All were young, vulnerable, and involved in sex work, By 1984, the body count reached 28, overwhelming the King County Sheriff's Office. The newly formed Green River Task Force, led by Detective Dave Reichert, faced a nightmare. A killer with no pattern, no motive, and no face. Early missteps proved catastrophic. Police initially focused on the victims' lifestyles, not the predator hunting them. We wasted hours interrogating pimps and drug dealers, Reichert later admitted. Ridgway exploited that bias. In 1983, detectives interviewed Ridgway after a sex worker reported his violent behavior. He passed a polygraph, flawed technology even then, and was dismissed. Without DNA profiling, which wouldn't exist for another decade, the case stalled. The 1990s brought a breakthrough. Advances in forensic science allowed detectives to re-examine evidence. Semen samples from 3 victims, Marla Bowman, 18, Carol Christensen, 21, and Roberta Hayes, 21, were matched to Ridgway's DNA in 2001. On November 30th, 2001, SWAT teams stormed the Kenworth plant, arresting the 52-year-old as co-workers watched in disbelief. "I thought it was a joke," said one employee. "Gary was the last guy you'd suspect." During interrogation, Ridgway remained eerily calm. He admitted to strangling 71 women, though only 49 could be confirmed. "I wanted to kill as many as I thought I could get away with," he shrugged. Detectives were stunned not just by the numbers, but by his ordinariness. This wasn't a cunning mastermind, just a mediocre man who'd slipped through the cracks. The lives stolen. Behind Ridgway's staggering tally are names, faces, and stories erased too soon. Take 16-year-old Kimmy Kai Pitzor, a Native American girl who fled abuse at home, only to vanish from Seattle's Aurora Avenue. Or 20-year-old Marie Malvar, whose father spent years plastering the city with her photo, unaware she'd been buried in a ravine. Many victims were teenagers, girls like Linda Rule, 16, who dreamed of becoming a model, and Alma Smith, 18, a mother who turned to sex work to feed her infant son. Ridgway preyed on society's invisibles. He targeted runaways, addicts, and sex workers, knowing their disappearances would draw little attention. He'd offer them $20 for sex, then drive to secluded areas, said prosecutor Jeff Baird. If they fought back, he choked them until they stopped. Some he killed within minutes. Others he kept for days, violating their corpses in acts too depraved to describe. For families, the grief was compounded by stigma. "People acted like my daughter deserved it," said Mary Bridget Meehan, mother of 18-year-old Patricia. But she was a child, lost, not evil. In 2003, Ridgway led authorities to 41 burial sites, many clustered near his childhood haunts. At one location, 4 skeletons lay within feet of a hiking trail, undiscovered for 15 years. He'd revisit the bodies, said FBI agent Kathleen Puckett. It was his way of reliving the thrill. A society complicit. The Green River case isn't just a story of one man's evil. It's an indictment of systemic indifference. From the start, police resources were laughably inadequate. The original task force had just 12 detectives for hundreds of leads. "We begged for more manpower," Reichert recalled, but budgets were cut the moment white middle-class victims stopped appearing. Media bias compounded the crisis. Early headlines focused on the seedy lives of victims, not the killer's pathology. When 14-year-old Dolores Williams disappeared in 1983, her mother's pleas were met with shrugs. "The detective told me, 'She's probably just partying,'" Williams said. "But I knew. My girl wouldn't leave her baby." Dolores's remains were identified in 2003, buried under a freeway overpass. Even Ridgway's co-workers missed glaring signs. At Kenworth, he often arrived with scratches on his face, claiming they were from rough sex. Supervisors never reported it. "We didn't want to ruin his life over rumors," one manager confessed. By the time DNA cracked the case, dozens more had died. Why he killed. What drives a man to kill 49 times? Psychologists paint Ridgway as a textbook case of schizoid personality disorder, a man devoid of empathy, driven by primal urges. His IQ of 82 placed him in the low average range, yet he outmaneuvered authorities for years. He wasn't smart, said FBI profiler John Douglas. He was lucky. Society ignored his victims, so he kept hunting. Ridgway's hatred of women stemmed from his mother, whom he called a hypocrite for preaching piety while belittling him. Sex workers became surrogates for his rage. Killing them felt like killing her, he told interrogators. Necrophilia, a common trait among serial killers, allowed him to exert total control. They couldn't say no anymore, he smirked. Yet Ridgway was no Hannibal Lecter. He lived paycheck to paycheck, collected model trains, and mowed his lawn obsessively. He compartmentalized, said Dr. Catherine Ramsland, a forensic psychologist. To him, murder was a hobby, like gardening. The Devil's Bargain. In 2003, Ridgway struck a deal: life imprisonment in exchange for revealing burial sites. For families, it was a gut-wrenching compromise. "We wanted him executed," said Kathy Mills, mother of Opal, "but without the deal, we'd never have found her." The agreement spared Ridgway the death penalty, a decision prosecutor Norm Maleng called the hardest of my career. Today, Ridgway, now 74, spends his days in Washington's Walla Walla prison, sketching birds and writing letters to true crime fans. His son, Matthew, disowned him, changing his last name. "My father is a stranger," he told reporters. A monster. The case transformed law enforcement. DNA databases, victim-centered protocols, and cross-agency task forces emerged from its ashes. Yet for all the progress, questions linger. Could Ridgway have been stopped sooner? And how many more monsters walk among us, shielded by apathy? The river remembers. The Green River still flows, its currents whispering the names of those lost. Gary Ridgway's crimes forced America to confront uncomfortable truths about justice delayed, about victims deemed unworthy, and about the banality of evil. His story is not just a true crime spectacle, it's a mirror held to society's soul. Today, memorials dot the Pacific Northwest. A plaque here, a ribbon there. They remind us that every life holds value, no matter how fractured. The Green River Killer may have stolen these women's futures, but he failed to erase their humanity. In the end, that is his defeat and their legacy.